let me start recording.
And I'll start sharing. So, well, I'll start with this first. I'll talk for a second, and then I'll start sharing screen. So, hi everybody. If I haven't met you before, my name is Doug Brown. Brenda mentioned a minute ago that I just finished running through FEND the other day myself. I wanted to. I've been trying to help in a bunch of the different groups in the Grow with Google program. And so I wanted to make sure I could understand, some of the questions that have been coming up for Project 7, as well as Project 6 and some of the others. Project 7 is kind of a cool project. They definitely are making you use all the skills that you get through the course. So I want to walk through the project today, give you a step-by-step. I've got kind of 7 high-level steps that I recommend you approach the project with. I've already posted this in the Slack channels yesterday, the URL for a repo that I've put together, which has 7 branches in it. Each branch covers each one of these steps that we're going to run through. And so as we go through these this morning, you'll get to see exactly how I put all this together. So with that being said, and yes, we are recording this. and I hope I don't go too fast. If you feel I'm going too fast, let me know. Oh, also real quick, the way I like to do these, I'll probably take like the first half hour, 40 minutes and go through the code, kind of how everything goes together. And I'll definitely share the repo again at the end of the session. And I also want to make sure that we leave a good 20, 30 minutes for question and answer session at the end as well. So feel free to start lining up questions and we'll knock them out as we get there. So I'm going to share my desktop here. And does everyone able to see my desktop okay? That's what I want first, to know that we've got it okay. All right, good. Okay, so the very first step that I recommend following is just to get a basic map display. This is it. So for step 1, all I'm going to do is just get the map on the screen with a basic banner, saying what my project is. I live in the Houston, Texas area. Katy, Texas is nearby. I decided to just pull together a list of decent Mexican restaurants in the area. And I created a locations JSON file. So this is just hard-coded data that I'm going to use that defines the restaurants that I'm going to be dealing with here. That's completely legal to do in the context of this application. You can have a hard-coded data source for your locations, but then you will still use your Maps API and then another API for using some other data source as well. The app file itself at this point is going to be really simple. Here I am, importing the basic CSS that came with the Create React app. I don't actually use it anywhere. I could have taken that out. I'm importing my JSON object and I'm giving it a value called locations. And then I'm importing the map display component that's going to be used to show the map. And we'll look at that one in just a minute. I've also got a basic state object here at the app level. And I want to stress again that it's important that you keep your state and your functions up at the level above the components that are going to need them. So if you have a group of components that are all going to need access to the same information, have the parent of those components hold that data so that it can share them and spread the wealth on that kind of stuff. Same thing with the functions. If there are functions that they're going to need, then you want to have them on a higher order parent as well. And you'll see that that continues to evolve as we go through this code. So here in my state, I'm defining my latitude and longitude of where I want to center the map. I'm also setting my zoom level. And I've got this value that I'm calling all. And it's just the locations that I've pulled in. And as we get farther in the code and the other branches, you'll see why I'm calling it all. Here I've got my quick and dirty header with my H1. It's in a div with my title. And then here's my map display component. And I'm passing the latitude and longitude on the props. And I'm passing the zoom level. And I'm also passing my locations. So that's it for the app.js file. Very simple, very straightforward at this point. My map display is also going to be pretty simple too. I've got a state where I'm going to hold the map object. And so by default, I'm going to set it to null. I've got a component did mount function, but I'm not putting anything in there right now. I've got a map ready function. So I'm using Google Maps React as a map component, a third-party map component. A lot of people use React Google Maps. I looked at that one. I didn't like it. so I went with Google Maps React instead. I didn't like it just from the standpoint of kind of how the code evolves while you're using it. This component to me is very much more in kind of the standard React flavor. And if you've looked at anybody's samples using React Google Maps and compare that to what we're going to be doing, you'll see what I'm talking about, where this is kind of very standard looking React components like everybody would be familiar with. So map ready, I'm going to, it's a function I'm going to receive from the map component. Once the map component has loaded, you'll see here my map component says that on ready, I'm going to fire this function, which is this.mapReady. This.mapReady is going to pass me two things. It's going to pass me the props for the map, and it's going to pass me the actual map object. Honestly, I'm never going to care about the props here. All I need is the map. That's something that as we start to get into markers and other things, I'll want to have the map on hand. So I'm going to store that in the state. So when I render my map, I'm going to have it take 100% of, I'm going to create a style object here, or just an object I'm calling style. It's going to have 100% width and height. I'm also going to create another variable for the center. That's the latitude and longitude in Google format, Google Maps format, taking the information that came in on the props. And so I'm going to create my map object. I'm giving it an ARIA role of application, an ARIA label of map. And then here's my onReady function. There's this Google property here, and that's actually coming from this Google API wrapper. So the value this.props.google is because I'm using this higher order class, or higher order component, sorry, called Google API wrapper. And you'll see the Google API wrapper, actually came in as part of Google Maps React. So Google Maps React is providing a lot of nice things here. There's a map component, there's a marker component, there's an info window component, there's this API wrapper component. So a lot of the things that you might have to do manually otherwise, like loading the API and doing all of those things, that's going to be completely taken care of for you. Setting my zoom level, the style that I created up here, I'm setting that here for the map as well. My initial center for the map. And then what I want to do when I click, this is actually a holdover from when I was going back and breaking stuff into branches. So you can kind of ignore this for right now. You'll see too that part of declaring this higher order component with Google API wrapper is that I pass it the API key. And the API key I've declared as a constant up here called map key. And so that's my Google map key. And so that's it. We're done doing that code in the first branch. Gives me this map. Doesn't look like much, but it's an important step in getting everything working. Sorry, it's my dog. All right, so let me go to our next branch. So next step is just going to be to get our standard markers coming up. So we've got, we've already got our location data. We know where we want our markers to be. You'll see that in app.js, I haven't changed a thing. This is exactly the same file that we had before. So it's passing all the same data, and all the data is going down to the map component. So the only thing I'm changing is map display. And you'll see I've added a lot of extra code to it at this point. And we're going to talk about all of that. But the upshot is here are all of my markers based on all of the data in my locations.json file. Now I can click on them, and they don't, it's going to bring up an info window. So we're going to have that in here too. But it's not animating, it's not going to do any of the other stuff. And I haven't bothered to put in a Finder window for filtering or anything else yet. All we're doing is getting the markers in the info window on here. So first I'm going to add a few more things to my state object on the map display. I want to have a list of all of the markers I'm going to create. I want a separate list of all of the properties that relate to each marker. And that's going to be, I'll cover why I'm doing it that way as we go through the code. I'm also going to want to keep track of which one of the markers is currently active. I also want the props for that currently active marker. And I want to know whether or not the info window is supposed to be showing. So to get those few things working on the map, I want to track these values, and that's going to let me keep everything in the place I want it to be. So on map ready, I've added an extra function here for this.update markers, and I'm going to pass it the location or the locations of everything that I've got come in. So on the props back here, I'm passing locations, which was my this.state.all. So that means every restaurant in my list, I'm passing down to the map. And so I'm going to create markers out of all those locations. So let's take a look at that one first. So update markers. I'm going to take all the locations. If there's nothing there, if it's not a valid array or a valid value, I'm just going to bail out of this function so I don't cause an error. So that's the first thing I check. Then I'm going to go through, and if there are already markers on the map, for some reason I'm changing that, so I want to clear the map and get rid of everything that's already there. So I'm going to iterate through all of the items that are in my markers list already, which is what my for each does. And for every marker in that list, I'm going to set its map to null, which is going to basically kill that marker and get rid of it. Once I've done that, then I'm going to I'm going to create a new marker props array, which is going to zero everything out for me. And then I'm going to start iterating through the markers. So I'm going to create a markers value, and that's going to be all of my locations, and I'm going to start mapping over those. For every location, then I'm going to get the location data itself and the index in the array. And I'm going to create a marker props, like a temporary marker props value here, so mprops. And the properties inside of that are going to be the same properties that I actually have in my location data. So name, street, city, that kind of stuff. So here I've got my key value, my index, the name, the position on the map, and the URL for that item. Those are the things that I want to display in my info window. If I wanted to put in the address and that kind of stuff, I would add it here too. And so then I'm going to take this marker that I created, the props for it, and I'm going to push it onto this marker props array. And then at the same time now, I'm going to create a marker. And I'm going to make that marker with the position that the Google map wants to see for the marker, the actual map object itself, and I've got this animation object, which is saying I'm going to have this marker do a drop onto the map. And then for that same marker, I'm also going to add a listener so that if it gets clicked on, it's going to fire off this marker click event. And the marker click is going to pass out the marker props and the marker, and then a null value. Because on marker click actually matches up with an on marker click that the Google Maps React component does as well. So I'm firing off my own version of that same call that the Google Maps React component is going to do if I click on the marker. And then I'm going to set the state after I've looped through all of those, and I'm adding my markers and my marker props. So what I've got now is two lists. I've got a list of markers, and they're in the order that they were created, and I've got a list of marker props with the properties that match each marker also in the same order. So if I ever need to look at a marker and its properties at the same time, I can say I want number 3 out of the lists, and I'll get the marker and its matching properties, but from 2 different sources because they have the same indexing. So if I look back up here, on marker click is going to say that I want to close the info window if it's already open, or just, I'm going to do it every time to make sure it's not open. Close info window is going to see if I have an active marker, and if so, it's going to set the active marker. It's going to change its animation to null, so in case it was bouncing or something. And then it's going to do a set state to say that I'm not showing an info window anymore, that I don't have an active marker anymore because I've closed the info window so nothing's active, and I don't have any active marker props. Okay, and then when I click on the marker, so I've closed the info window, and then the next thing I want to do is say, I am showing the info window now. The active marker is going to be this marker that I've passed in here. The properties for the active marker are going to be the props that I passed in here. By doing the set state, it's going to cause the screen to redraw. And so that's going to kick off the render function. And so the render function still has my height and width being at 100. And it still has my centered map. And I'm creating this value, AM props, AM for active marker. And this is getting my active marker props, just so I don't have to keep writing this.state.activeMarker props over and over again in the return function. So here I've still got my onReady, my Google, my Zoom style, my initial center, my onClick for closing the info window. And now I'm going to add the info window object itself. The marker is going to be my active marker. Whether or not the info window is visible is going to be my showing info window. And the onClose function, so if I click the X in the corner of the info window, it's going to call this same close window function that I have defined that I can use for other purposes too. And so if the info window is visible, I'm going to show, the name as long as the name is there. And as long as I have properties, then I'm going to show the URL. And I'm also going to show, a marker that says see the website, and it has the href for it. So we can see that if I click on one here, I get the name. I've got a link that says see website. If I click on it, it's going to navigate me to the website. So it's doing everything I expected it to. There's a lot of stuff in this step, but everything that we've done here now is reusable. I've written it in a way that if I wanted to call, click marker or on marker click from somewhere else, I could. And if I pass the values in, then it's going to make that marker show up with the info window, no matter where I called it from, what action triggered that. That's going to be important when we get into the later steps. All right, so let me go to step 3. Okay, so still, I am not changing anything in my locations. I'm just going to close that now because we're never going to look at it again. My app.js file, still not changing anything here either. This is the exact same file I've been working with the whole time. So my next step is to add some Foursquare data, and this is going to satisfy the requirement for having a third-party API connected to my display. So what I want to do here, and I'll show you what the result looks like. What I want to have is when I click on something, if Foursquare has information that goes with that restaurant, I want to see the picture, and I'm going to give a little credit. You could do other stuff with it if you wanted to. I just did a bare basics version. So the reason that you don't get anything on this restaurant is because Ray's doesn't have anything on Foursquare. So they didn't give me anything back. So let's look and see how we did this. You'll see that my state hasn't changed from step 2. It's remained the same. Map ready has remained the same. My close info window still remained the same. I have a new function here called get business info. We'll get to that one in a minute. My on marker click has changed a lot. My update markers has remained the same. And my render has just added a section for if I have images in the data, I'm going to display the image information. So the 2 real things I've done is I've added a lot of meat to my on marker click function, and I've added a utility function for getting business info. So let's look at what I did with on marker click. You'll see that I've created a URL here using my Foursquare API. And if you look up in the top, I've added all of the keys. Here's my Foursquare client, my Foursquare secret key, and my Foursquare version. And so I'm inserting those into my Foursquare URL. And there are a couple of Foursquare APIs I'm going to use along the way here. So this first one is just to get Foursquare data. So I'm creating a URL, an empty headers object. With those 2 things, I'm creating a request object. I've got my active marker props, empty value that I've created. And so the next thing I'm going to do is fetch that request. Once I get a response, I'm going to parse the JSON. I'm going to take that result, and now I'm going to start doing some stuff with it. So I want to look for the specific restaurant that this marker is for. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to call this get business info utility function that I've created. And in that function, I'm passing the props for the restaurant, which I got with the onMarkerClick call. And I'm passing the JSON result that I got from Foursquare, which is going to have a list of venues and the data inside of those things. With get business info, what I'm looking for is, do I have anything that matches in the Foursquare data with the restaurant I'm looking at? So I'm going to filter this Foursquare data, and I'm going to take each item, and I'm going to check and see if the name of that item in the Foursquare data includes the name of the restaurant that I'm looking for, or if my restaurant name includes the name that's in the Foursquare data. And the reason I'm doing this is because the Foursquare data and the restaurant names that I'm using don't always match completely. One or the other of them is like a longer name, a longer version of the name that I've got sometimes. And to be honest, the restaurant data that I'm using in my JSON file, I just went through and manually pulled from a Google Maps search saying, show me the best Mexican restaurants in Katy, Texas. So Google Maps information and Foursquare's information don't always line up in terms of the restaurant names. So I'm just comparing it two ways here. And so what that's going to do is it's going to give me a list of potentially matching restaurants. So I'm going to take that item and I'm going to say whatever the first one is, whatever the first item in that result list back is, I'm going to make that be my Foursquare data. So now my active marker props is going to be the props that I was passed, along with a new property called Foursquare that has the Foursquare data for that restaurant. And now I'm going to check and say if I've got Foursquare data for the restaurant, because I might not, but if I do, then I'm going to do another API call to Foursquare, and this is going to be to get the images. So you can see I'm calling the Photos API, and I'm going to fetch that URL. And once I get that response back, I'm going to parse that JSON, take the result of that, and I'm going to take now my active marker props that I'm working with. I'm going to keep the active marker props I've already got, and I'm going to add another new property called images, which is, and from there I'm going to take the photos property in the result response. And so as long as I've got an active state marker, I'm going to set the animation on that to null. And now I'm going to set the animation on this marker, on this new marker, to be bouncing. This is just to make sure if there was a previous active marker, I make it stop bouncing. This new one's going to bounce. And then I'm going to do a set state. I want to show the info window. I'm going to have a new active marker. This is my new active marker props. If I didn't have Foursquare data, then I'm just still going to show the new marker or the new selected marker anyway, and I'm going to set the same kind of state. So a lot of code in just two functions that I've added here, but just those two functions now let me click on a marker and get a result like that. If I click on a different marker, it stops the first one from bouncing, switches stuff around. So I'm getting all of the functionality that I wanted on these things. Again, I still haven't even bothered doing the filter list yet. This is just getting my basic map working. Okay, so let's go to step 4. Now I'm actually going to add a list drawer. You can see I've got a drawer here. If I click the button, I get a list. I can type in here and it's not doing anything yet. And if I click on these, they don't do anything either. All I want to do is get the list drawer working first so it shows up. So here I've created a list drawer component. I'll bring that up here so we can look at it in a minute. And I have changed my app.js file now. App.js, I've added a styles object, and that's going to let me have my menu button up at the top and some display parameters and a margin. So just some basic CSS for positioning a couple of things on here. I have a toggle drawer function. The toggle drawer is going to tell me whether or not the drawer is supposed to be open. I've added a button here, which is going to be my hamburger button in the top left corner that lets me open and close. And then I've added my list drawer component here. And the list drawer has, I'm also passing it the locations, which is still the this.state.all. I'm passing the open function, or the open value, sorry, which is my state value for open. And I'm passing the toggle drawer, which is this toggle drawer up here. So I'm not changing anything on the map display at all in this step. All I'm doing is adding the visual for the list drawer. And so here my list drawer component, it's got a simple state, which is whether or not it's open. I'm thinking ahead, and I've put in a value for my query. Have I typed in anything that I want to filter by? And I'm initializing that to be empty. I've created some styles for how I'm going to display the list of items. So you can see I've got my list width. I'm not going to have any bullets on the list. I want to have a full list width. Each list item is going to have a margin on the bottom, so there's some nice spacing. Each item in the list is going to have a background transparent, no border. It's going to be black text. I'll show you the reason for that in a minute. And the filter entry is a text field, and it's going to have a border with padding and a margin and some width on it too. So just again, some pretty simple CSS stuff. Update query. This is going to get fired every time I'm typing into the query box. I'm going to set my state. The new query is just going to be the value that I've typed in. So I've made this a stateful component instead of a stateless component by having the value that's in there always tracked and managed through state. My render here is pretty simple. I am using Material UI for React. I am a big fan of Material UI for React. It's got a ton of really great components. The visuals on them are really, really nice out of the gate. You can style them however you want. The functionality is spot on. You can make stuff that looks just like an Android app using these Material UI components. So here I'm using a standard drawer component. Whether or not it's open is controlled by the props that I've gotten passed down from the parent object. And the function for closing it is the toggle drawer function that got passed down again from the parent, because remember, we're keeping things at a higher level so that we can tell at the parent level whether or not the drawer is open. That might let us do some messaging to the map if we need it to. Then some basic layout here. I've got a div for my list. I've got the input box at the top. It's also got my filter entry styles. I'm saying it's a text input. This is my placeholder text that says it's going to be filter list. I've got a name on it. I've got my update query function for when I change values. And the initial value of it is the state query. And then I've got the list of elements, the list of restaurants. This is my no bullets list. And I'm mapping over the locations. So as long as I have locations, then I'm going to map over them. I'm going to get each location, each index. I use the index as the key here. Each item, gets the list item style. And you can see that what I've done is I've made each of these items in the list a button. The great thing about making it a button is you're not using a URL. You can actually give it an on-click event. You're not using and it gets all of the tabbing and everything else that you want from an accessibility standpoint. So if you look through what I've made, I can tab through everything with the standard map component, and you can see my button gets a tab as well. And if I click on it, everything inside of here is getting a tab too. So if you remember back in step 1 with the map display, that I added the parameters for the ARIA label and the role. That's the only special code that I'm going to write anywhere to make this application 100% accessible and pass all of the accessibility checks for this project. Everything else, as long as my DOM is properly structured and as long as I'm using proper components like buttons instead of text fields, this thing is going to be completely accessible out of the box. I didn't have to do any tab indexing. I didn't have to create any special classes for highlighting. That's already taken care of by the browser because I'm using buttons. So all of that stuff's going to be good to go. So my list drawer is now completely done. Fairly simple, nothing too complicated here. Some styles, a basic function, and then the rest of it's just layout using a pre-rendered component that I was able to get from a third-party library. All right, that's step 4. Let's look at step 5. Step 5, I'm going to add a little more code, not a lot more code. We'll start at the app level, because remember, I want to keep these things lifted up as high as I can in the hierarchy of components. So my component did mount. I've changed this a little bit. I'm saying I've got a state that is the initial state that I provided up here at the top that we've had the whole time. So I'm taking that state. Once the component finishes mounting, I'm expanding my state to now include what I'm calling the filtered property. And filtered is a function, this.filter locations. I'm taking the list of all restaurants and filtering it by whatever query I want here. In this case, by default, I'm not filtering it at all. So it's going to be an empty query string. My toggle drawer remains the same. Update query now is saying, I'm going to add this on the child. I'm writing a function that says I want update query, pass me the query string. I'm going to set my state again, keeping the state that I've got, but overriding my selected index, which is going to be null. That's a new property I'm creating. And I'm going to have my filtered list be all of the restaurants filtered by whatever this new query parameter is that's been passed to me. Filter locations then is just taking all of the locations, which I'm getting passed by this .state.all, taking the query parameter and filtering them. So for each location, does the name in lowercase include the query string that I've been passed in lowercase form? It's important to make these both lowercase as I'm checking because the includes function is case sensitive. Everything else here remains exactly the same. So I'm updating my state. I'm adding this filtered list. You'll see here now, instead of passing this.state.all to the locations and to the map, or to the list drawer and to the map, I'm now passing the filtered list. So what this will do is it will mean that if I've entered a query somewhere and the number of restaurants in the filtered list is smaller than the all list, I'm going to see the smaller list. It's a very small change, but it's going to have a big impact on what we do. My map display hasn't changed at all still. And I don't think it's going to change ever again in this entire project now. Everything just seems to be working. It's always going to show me whatever markers I've said I wanted based on the locations I pass it. It's going to be able to show me the info window for whatever marker gets selected. So I think that's pretty solid. I'm just going to close that for the time being. My list drawer, on the other hand, this is changing a little bit. So now my update query is happening just like it was before. And now when I call it, I'm not just going to set the state now. I'm also going to call the filter locations function that I got passed on the props. This is actually a fairly small set of changes that I've made, but it makes a huge impact now on what I can do. Because you can see if I type in taco, I've only got 2 restaurants left. Now these still don't do anything when I click on them, but that's okay. This is a huge piece of functionality. My filtering is working now. And I've got these 2 taco restaurants, neither one of which has Foursquare data, but they do everything that they're supposed to do functionally. Okay, so we want to be able to click on that list item and have the marker activate. So let's go to step 6. Step 6 is going to be pretty simple too. I'm going to go back here now. And if you look, I haven't changed. Everything else is the same, state's the same, styles are the same. Component did mount hasn't changed, toggle drawer, update query, all that stuff's the same, filter locations. But now I've added this click list item handler. This is a new function. What I'm going to do is it's going to receive an index. And with that index, I'm going to change my state to say my selected index is this new index. And open should be the opposite of whatever this .state.open is, which is what we're using for the info window. That's all I'm changing here. I'm adding click list item as a handler, as a property on both map display and on list drawer. I added it on both, but honestly, I'm never using it on map display. If I wanted to, one of the thoughts I had was when I click on a marker in the map display, I could also highlight it in the drawer. But I'm always closing the drawer by default if I click outside of it, so I just didn't do that one. So let's look at list drawer. We want to look for this .click list item. So we can see if I click on the button, I've added an onClick function now. The onClick is this .props.click list item. I didn't actually write any new code in the list drawer at all. All I did was added an onClick function in the list drawer that says to call the function in the higher level component in app.js. I'm going to pass it the index. And remember, index is a value that I'm getting from my map. So I'm saying, hey, I've clicked the third item in this list, and I'm going to pass that value back up to the app.js. App.js is then going to take the onClick or the click list item handler here, and it's going to set state for the selected index and whether or not the info window is supposed to be open. That then is going to go to the map display, and map display now is going to, if you remember, we had this onMarkerClick function. So hang on a second. Yeah, so I've added this component will receive props now in map display. And there's some stuff going on in here. So I'm checking from my state whether or not I previously dropped the markers, which means it came on for the first time. Because personally, I find it a little annoying if I'm filtering and every time the markers keep dropping. So it's going to drop the first time, and from then on when I'm doing filtering, I'm never going to see them drop again. I'm going to check the number of locations in the new props. And if it's not the same as the number of locations I already have, that means that we've done some filtering and we've changed things. So I'm going to close the info window, I'm going to update the markers, and I'm going to set the state for that, and then I'm done. Because the rest of it's going to take care of itself with state management. If my selected index in the properties is not the same as my active marker number, then stuff has changed there too. And I'm going to go through and make some updates. And then finally, I'm going to make sure that there's a selected index at all. If there isn't one, I'm just going to bail out because we're not actually changing anything. So once I know that there's a selected index, now I'm going to fire off that marker click event that I had before. I'm going to grab the properties out of my marker props based on the selected index that I just got passed, and I'm going to get the marker based on that selected index too. And I'm going to use those two things to fire off my onMarkerClick function. It's the same onMarkerClick function that we had before. I made a slight adjustment to it so that it knows whether or not it's going to animate things, based on the one property, based on the one state value. But aside from that, this is it. It's the same function I had before. And so now if I come in here and I click on Ray's Mexican Restaurant again, you'll see now it's starting to bounce. So it's not that I wrote a lot of extra code to make this stuff happen. It's that I kept the code very modular. and I made sure that each piece of code knew how to do its job really well. That's the important part in React, is to think about it like employees and managers, and you're going to give them a job to do, and you're going to make sure that they have the instructions and they know how to do that job really, really well. And then you can just, they can be told by anybody, hey, I need you to go and do this for me, and they'll do the job. So whether I click on the marker now or whether I click on the list item, each of those two events is generating a message to send back to the original marker property or the original marker value, so it knows what to do with itself from there. Okay, so we still have one more set of requirements that we haven't covered yet, and that is doing error handling. And actually, you're going to be pretty surprised. It's one of the things I like about Google Maps React. The error handling is really kind of simple. It took me a minute to figure out how to do it with what they've got, but once I did, I was like, okay, this is a breeze. Okay. So let's take a look at map display again real quick. Down here at the bottom. So with my higher order component, you remember I had the API map key here before, but I've added another property now called loading container. And I've got this thing called no map display. And if you notice here, I've created a component called no map display. This is really cool. Basically what they let you do is you can say that I want to have, instead of just the standard loading message that Google Maps gives you on the screen when it's first coming up, you can say I want to create my own custom loader. And it can look like whatever you want it to. So you create it as a React component and you pass it to this loading container thing. I called it no map display for a specific reason. What I'm doing is when the component mounts, first I'm saying show is false. So I'm not going to show an error. I'm just going to show the loader. I have a timeout value, which is null. And when the component mounts, I create a timeout. I'm doing a 1 second timeout. That's plenty of time to know whether or not Google Maps is successfully connecting to the internet, downloading the library, and blah, blah, blah. And I'm setting that state to the timeout. Component will unmount. If you've not used this before, this is to kind of do cleanup actions when you're getting rid of a component and might leave it in an unexpected state with some stuff hanging out there. So what I do in component will unmount is if the timeout is still running, I'm clearing it just to make sure that it's not there, because otherwise that can cause a resource leak. And then I've got this show message function which says true. So if you see, I've got my timeout, and after 1 second, it's going to fire off my show message function, which is going to say, hey, set show to true, and show is going to display an error. And so what I've got is a pretty simple setup that says, if this .date.show, then show an error message that says that I couldn't get to the map control because there's a network problem. Otherwise, just show a loading message. It was that simple. Error handling on this was a piece of cake once I figured out that they let you do a customized loader this way, and I could manipulate it however I want. So if I were to take this map offline, you would actually get to see that there was a loader, and if you look really quick, you'll see it say loading really fast. It goes so fast you can hardly see it. But if I took it offline, you would see that there's nothing there. You'll get the error message, and it works just like it's expected to. Then as far as doing the, real quick, as far as doing the offline first approach that they want to have, if you look at some of the feedback that they provide, or I saw some other folks on the Slack channel providing, all you have to do to qualify for that, by default, index.js says unregister. If you just come in here and change it to register, you'll qualify. You just have to call it out in your submission notes or in your README. You'll never actually see it work because you'd have to actually publish the package into a final runtime and post it on a web server. That's okay. You don't have to worry about it here. And actually the web service stuff that comes with Create React App does get a little more involved. Like if you really want to dive into it, there's a whole configuration system behind it. You can configure what to preload and how long to leave stuff in there and all sorts of other things. So it uses Google Workbox, which is their system for creating service workers. It's pretty nice. I have not completely dug into it yet. Going to be honest, I'm all about just doing what needs to be done on these projects to get them to pass. So you can just burn through them really fast. And then going back and looking at the details for something you really want to build with it later. So that's it. We've got a fully functioning Maps app. I can come in here. I can say I want to find tacos. I can click on one of the links. I can get the thing bouncing. If I click on a different one, it's going to cancel out and go fine. If I stop it and start it again, that's going to work fine too. Everything in here is doing everything it needs to. It's fully accessible. It's using all of the APIs. I'll be honest, I passed on the first time. I wasn't expecting to. I was sure that they would find something that I had missed in the requirements and kick it back to me for an adjustment. I was really happy that I got on the first time. So never be afraid to, take what you've got and submit it. Don't overthink it. Don't think you're missing something. Let the reviewers be the final arbiter of that decision and tell you whether or not you need to come back and make some changes. So took a little longer to run through the code than I thought it would. Apologize, but we still have, I'll stay around and we can answer questions. We've still got at least 10 minutes. We started a few minutes late, so I'm happy to go 15, 20, whatever you guys want to do. So I haven't been monitoring the chat because I've been too busy talking. But do you guys have any questions that you want to cover?
Doug, there's one question from Eunice, and I know that Sam also had a question, an earlier question.
Okay. Trying to...
Sam, do you want to go first? Do you want to unmic and...
Get my chat window back. There we go.
Yeah, mine was just simple. On line 59 of the, I think it's the map display. I mean, but it was one of the earlier stages. It's not okay. That.
Which part was it about? We can find it because it'll be the same code.
You had two indexes. You called, you create index, and then it might be on the other one actually. It might be on the list drawer then. No, it wasn't on the list drawer. It wasn't early. Never mind. It's not that important.
Oh, well, no. If you had a question, it is important.
Maybe was just the way you were like calling index twice on. Let me see. Maybe on the app.js.
All right, let me try bringing that up.
No.
So the index that I'm always concerned about is selected index. And that's just to let me know which marker the user has picked to be the active marker. And I'm pretty sure if we look in map display, like if I look here for the word index, whoops, that one. Oh, right, I'm on my Mac. So I'm getting past the value of index, but I'm always just using that to set another property. So I'm setting selected index to index, right? And if I go to map display, I'm always looking for selected index. Yeah, it's always selected index. And so here,
there you go,
okay.
There it is.
So this one, okay, if this is the question, yeah, this is a good question too. So if you look at the map function, and you can look it up on the MDN website. MDN is a great resource. Like if I do, let me do just a quick search, I'll say MDN map, right? And I'm going to look at the array.prototype.map. Oops, sorry, that's the wrong map. Array.prototype.map. And so it'll give me all of the information about using the map function. And you can see that what it says is it's always going to give me the current value. And optionally, I can get the index in the array for the current value. And even further optionally still, if I really want to, I can get the entire array. So I'm not wanting the entire array. I'm getting back the location. So I'm going over the list of locations that I've been given to render markers for, which is this. And I'm mapping it. And so each iteration of the map, I'm taking the location, and I'm also getting the index of that location in the array. So, you know, number 0, number 1, number 2. And so say I'm on number 2, so this is, you know, 0, 1, 2, that means I'm on the third location in the array. The index for that third location is 2. And so I'm setting the key to 2. And I'm setting index to 2. And you know, if you're not as familiar with this part, remember that JavaScript shorthand in objects like this, index is the same as writing index colon index. I just don't have to write it twice because I want my property to be the value of a variable with the same name. So I'm just saying index. So key has the value of index. Index has the value of index. It's a little redundant, but I just did it for the sake of clarity that you would know here I'm using it for a key, and here I'm using it because I'm actually wanting to track it as the index of this item.
Thank you.
Sure.
We had 2 more questions come in chat.
All right, what do we got?
Eunice asks, how do we address service workers in the README?
Great, good question. I actually wrote my README here. It's in the final version. So you can, or did I include it in the README? Maybe not. But it's, you know, it's really simple. You can just put in a line that says the standard create React app service worker has been enabled. It's only available, you know, when running a production build, and won't be available in testing during review. And that's about all you have to say. They take that and they're happy with that.
Okay, this question, thank you. This question comes in from LW. Can you show us again where, when you do the filter, that the map markers do not keep rebouncing again?
Oh, yeah. So if we go back up to, so basically, remember when I'm doing the filter, I'm doing component will receive props. And what that's passing me is all of the properties from the app.js. So if we go back and look at what I've got on app.js, the properties that get passed to map are the latitude, longitude, zoom location, the selected index, and the click list items. So locations is the thing that I'm going to be most interested in when I'm looking at this part. So I've got a state for my markers length, and I'm looking at locations that came in on the new props, and I'm checking that length. And if they don't match, I'm closing the info window. And closing the info window looks to see if I've already got an active marker. And if I do, then it's setting the animation for that active marker to null. So anytime I'm manipulating markers, it means that, you know, I've filtered something, and so I want to, you know, close whatever info window I had open because that marker might not even exist anymore. If I am clicking a marker, I'm going to close the info window then too because I might be clicking on a different marker. And so it's always going to look and say, do I have an active marker specified already? That's the actual marker object. And if I do, it's going to tell that active marker to just set its animation to nothing. It's going to stop bouncing. So again, you know, break these pieces of logic into reusable chunks. If you know that you're going to have multiple scenarios where you want to close the info window and make markers stop bouncing, now write it out as a separate piece of code that anybody can call and say, hey, I need you to close the info window. Because there's like 3 spots in here that I think that this gets called from.
Okay, Doug, last question from Lisa regarding hiding API keys. If we secure at top of map.js, what do we put in place where it is called in code?
Okay, interesting question. So you will notice, of course, that I have left my keys here. Whether or not you agree with that being a good practice, whatever. The nice thing about Google Maps, this key, is you can specifically lock it to a particular domain. So this key I have locked on my account. It won't work for anything other than localhost 3000. If you try localhost 3001, it won't work. So, it's not a big deal to leave your key in there, really, as long as you're locking it that way. If you don't let anybody use it for production outside of domains you want them to, then it's a safe key. Foursquare is a little different. They don't have a locking mechanism like that I saw. I left these in here. I might just shut the account down or ditch the keys. But what you could do is, just change it and say, put your own key here. and that would be fine. And you could submit it for review that way. Honestly, for submitting it for review, I left the keys in just to make it easier on the reviewers. It's when you sign up for Foursquare, it's not like they're asking you for payment data up front or payment information. So you're not going to get charged for it. There's not a lot of danger in putting it out there. If it's a key that you have generated that you have a paid account for, then yeah, I'd be a little more careful about putting it around. But again, Foursquare allows their keys to be used from a client-side application like this, and there's no way you can hide and secure those keys if you're putting it in a client-side app. I originally wanted to use Yelp. The reason I didn't use Yelp is because they don't let you put your keys in your client application. You wind up getting CORS errors, and they don't give you any way to get around that. And so if you wanted to use Yelp in a web application, then you actually have to have that information come through your server on the back end so that the keys are completely hidden and can't be hijacked. So whether or not you want to put them in, matter of choice for you. But with Foursquare, there's not really any downside to leaving them in there as far as submitting stuff for review.
My question really centered around, yes, you have them at the top of the map.js. However, what did you name them in the string? For example.
Oh, sure. So you can see here, I've got FS client, FS secret, and FS version. And if I go down, here we go. Whoops. Yeah. So if we go down here, you can see I'm using a computed string. So I've got the backtick instead of the single quote.
Oh, okay.
And in here, I'm using the $ with the curly brace.
Oh, all right.
And so I'm just using FS client, FS secret, and FS version, and it's just building the string out for me that way.
Thank
I
you.
really like being able to use that shortcut. It's a whole lot simpler than, quote, string, quote, plus, that's kind of a pain. So yeah, highly recommend doing these shorthands.
Thank you very much.
Sure. I saw LW had a question about what's a CORS error. So trying to remember exactly what CORS stands for. It's cross origin something. Basically, it's if you make a request from your web page. So I've got my application running, and let's say my personal domain is finitemonkey.com. So I've got a web application running on www.finitemonkey.com, and that's running in your browser on your machine. And your browser knows that the code for this website has come from finitemonkey.com. But the code inside of that application tries to make a request out to, say, yelp.com. Well, Yelp is going to, first, it's not the server, it's the browser is going to say, and all browsers do this. All of the big browsers and the standards compliance ones do this. They look at the source of the web page itself, and they say the web page comes from finitemonkey.com. And they say the request that's being generated from that web page is for Yelp.com. And so I'm going to put this cross-origin header on it because I'm coming from one web origin to another web origin. And it's going to send that information to the Yelp server, and then Yelp can decide whether or not they want to allow requests from other origins to be permitted. And if they say no, then it's going to come back to the browser, and the browser is going to say, hey, cross-origin requests are not permitted here. If Yelp says that's fine, then they're going to process the request, they're going to return it, and everything's going to be okay. Most places don't permit cross-origin requests that way without having an account and setting up the appropriate permissions and etc. Google is great for that. That's how you can keep your Maps key from being used on other applications besides your own. All right, any other questions? Otherwise, hopefully this was helpful. And I'm around on the lists a lot, so you guys can hit me up for questions. Oh, I did say I was going to put up my GitHub repo so you can see it. Anytime, this is my GitHub repo. You can see all my projects here. All of my FEND code is up here too. I haven't broken them all down into walkthroughs like this, but this one here is the maps walkthrough that we reviewed today. And so you can see that we do have all 7 branches here. So you can go through those and check everything out at your own pace. So, anything else? All right.
As always, you're amazing. I'm going to stop the recording now.
All right, thanks.